Okay, we're ready to go ahead and install the elevator. So we're going to remove the elevator halves from the stab. Now, if you're going to use one servo, you're going to need to end up connecting these two with the connector rod that comes with the kit. But I'm going to use two servos, and so each of these is going to be controlled independently with a servo, and so you won't need that rod connecting them through the fuselage. So here's the connector rod you would use if you're going to use just one servo in the back. You would use that to be able to connect the two elevator halves together. So using one servo would lift this one and the rod would lift the other. But I'm not going to use that. I prefer to have two servos so I can refine the movement on my elevators, and it doesn't add that much more weight, especially in such a light plane as this. And then the next step is going to be to slide this into the fuselage and line it up perfectly, both on its axis as well as side to side, so that it's equal side to side and from wingtip to elevator tip. Okay, so I've got it slid in place. I've got it marked off, or I've got it in place so that it's equidistant on the left and right sides, and that it's also equidistant from the tip of the wing to the tip of the elevator. You can use a ruler, or I used a ruler to check the left and right, and then I used Mason's line, which does not stretch, to check the incidence, the angle from the elevator to the wingtip. Just trying to place it exactly where it is on one side, and checking right at your thumb, and right where the string touches the wingtip and the elevator, and moving to the other side. And double checking that, and that is spot on. Okay, so now what we're going to do, once it's perfectly aligned left to right and distance from tip to elevator on both sides, check all four measurements, double and triple check them, try and get as close as possible. I've flown a plane that was off by quite a bit and it still flew fine, but you really want to get this as close as possible. Next thing you're going to do is use a Sharpie and just mark along the outside of the fuselage, and don't worry about getting the ink on there because you can take it back off with alcohol. Make sure you mark the top and then lift up and mark underneath. Okay, once you've got it marked, go ahead and gently slide the stab back out of the fuselage. Alright, you can see this marked on the top and the bottom. Again, using a very sharp X-Acto knife, you want to cut along this line, and then we're going to epoxy in here and slide it back in. You can cut just to the inside of this line so you're not seeing wood, and again we'll be able to wipe that off with some alcohol afterwards. Make sure that you try to cut only through the film covering and not the wood, because cutting through the wood will weaken the stab a little bit. That's easier said than done. You're obviously going to make some indents into the wood, but if you just take your time, kind of slice gently, making sure to cut all the way around, and repeating on the other side. Once you've got it cut, just kind of slide the blade under there, get it started. And if you've done a good job of cutting through, but not too far, you'll be able to just peel it right off of the wood. It'll take a little bit of the wood fibers up with it, but that's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so we're going to once again mix up some epoxy. Make sure you have enough to fit on both sides. Go ahead and place the stab in. Put a little bit of epoxy on one side, top and bottom. And then go ahead and slide this side all the way in and over onto the other side, so there's wood showing on the opposite side now. And then repeat the procedure on the opposite side. Sorry, Joe. Lining up the marks you've made, the center lines. Get it just about perfect. Once again, double check your measurements with the string and checking your distance left to right. I'd recommend using 15-minute epoxy if you want to have a little bit more time to work. And then if everything checks out fine, use a paper towel to clean up the excess. First, just a dry paper towel to get up the majority. And after you've done that, triple check your measurements. Make sure you haven't accidentally moved it while you were wiping. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so just like in the ailerons, we're going to go ahead and cut the slots for the horns. And then we're going to put epoxy on the hinges and slide them into the stab. But before we do that, I've used some Vaseline or petroleum jelly and a paintbrush to paint Vaseline all around the hinges. That way when we put the epoxy on the hinge and slide it in, it won't get epoxy on in the actual pin hinge and freeze it up. So let's go ahead and get to work. Just as in the ailerons, we want to go ahead and cut the film away from the slots that are pre-cut, just hidden underneath the coating. Again, using a sharp knife so you cut more than you tear. Okay, so the next step is going to be to go ahead and glue these hinges into the stab. I went ahead and secured the horns into the elevator just like I did with the ailerons. So I applied the Vaseline to the pins so epoxy does not get in there. Going to apply epoxy all around these hinges until all four are covered, and then I will proceed to slide it into the slots. It's usually best to start one side to the other, going outside in or inside out. Is that good? Mm-hmm. Firmly push down so there's a minimal spacing between the stab and the elevator, and an even spacing, and enough spacing on the side as well that it can move freely. Okay, once that's in place, use paper towels and alcohol. Do the other half and use paper towels and alcohol to wipe up the excess. And now we're ready to go ahead and cut the servo holes for the elevator servos, which are located just in front of the stab. Once again, using a sharp blade. And kind of tracing the outside of the wood with the edge of the knife so you're not cutting into the wood but just using it as a guide. Repeat the process on the opposite side and you're ready to install the servos. Okay, so now we're ready to install the servo. I've pre-drilled the holes as before. The elevator servos go with the gears pointing are closest to the tail, not away. And go ahead and secure the servo with your servo screws, one at a time. Okay, so we have our servo installed. Now if you just take the servo arm with the nylon disc, attach it 90 degrees, and get your servo rod adjusted to about 130 millimeters, 140 millimeters. So that when the elevator is flat and this arm is at 90 degrees, this is just about a perfect distance. Once that's correct, attach using the bolts and the nylon nuts. And then do the same to attach it to the horn. Using the nylon nuts, attach it and tighten them down.